The most famous Christian verse of all, one that we take stands with at hockey games, football games. Anybody know which one I'm talking about? John 3:16. Come on. It says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son. Whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life." That's the verse we take a stance on. Did you know the next verse? Verse 17 says, "For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him." In other words, Jesus didn't get sent to take a stand, to condemn anyone who didn't believe like him. And the Christians, the Christ-like ones in Antioch, were labeled Christ-like because they couldn't figure them out because they didn't take a stand against other religions, other nationalities. They didn't condemn those who didn't believe like them. And they were labeled Christ-like. Oh, how we have drifted, haven't we? That local politician can say, hey, Christians are the problem with the world today. So if you're ever asked to take a stand, or you're wondering, where do I take a stand and how do I take a stand? Let's take our cue from Jesus, okay? How did Jesus take a stand? What did Jesus stand for? Let's go to John chapter 8. John chapter 8 is a fascinating story, a familiar one. In fact, it's interesting that this passage has been debated more than most passages in the New Testament. And many religious men and women have tried to exclude this story in particular from the Bible because it's so contrary to our human brain and how we stand, where we stand, how we stand, and how religion in particular should stand. Jesus was completely opposite, and Jesus confused everybody because he wasn't like every other religious leader. Now look at this in John chapter 8, verse 1. It says, "But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives early in the morning. He came again into the temple, and all the people were coming to him, and he sat down and began to teach them." Okay, verse 3, "The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery, and having set her in the center of the court, they said to him, 'Teacher, this woman has been caught in adultery in the very act.'" Which makes me raise an eyebrow a little bit. What were you guys doing, Pharisees and scribes, that you caught her and you doubled up on that? You made sure that Jesus knew we caught her in the very act. I'd be like, my eyebrows would go up. Aren't you supposed to be at church? Anyway. The truth is that this is a very public problem. It's a very public problem. It's a very public problem for that woman. And it's religion's MO. Basically, it's to take something that is a public sin and expose it and make it even more public. And the religious leaders, it's their natural instinct to make the public problem and even more public and expose her sin. Where Jesus was different. And in fact, Peter, one of Jesus' closest disciples, wrote this in his book in 1 Peter 4. He says, "Above all, keep fervent in love for one another, because love exposes a multitude of sins." That's not what he said. He said love what? Covers a multitude of sins. And I wonder if Peter wrote these words in 1 Peter with this story in mind. Thinking of, we got to be like Jesus. That Jesus didn't expose. The Pharisees exposed. The Pharisees wanted to make a public problem more public. Wanted to make sure that they took a stand for righteousness, all these things. But Jesus did something completely different. Jesus covered. Look at how Jesus covered. Look what he did. Verse 5. The Pharisees said to Jesus, "Now in the law of Moses commanded us to stone such women. What then do you say?" Then they were saying this, testing him so that they might have grounds for accusing him. Okay, now watch. The disciples, look at this. John is showing and exposing the Pharisees' motive. And the Pharisees' motive was to motivate Jesus to take a stand. They were pushing Jesus to take a stand for the law. The reason why they're testing Jesus to take a stand for the law is because if you are who you say you are, if you are the Messiah, and we're going to test you, if you're the Messiah, surely you're going to take a stand for the law. Because we've brought to you, and the law of Moses, they just reminded him in case he forgot. They reminded Jesus that, hey, the law of Moses says that, hey, anyone caught in adultery needs to be stoned. And they're standing there, rocks in their hands, and saying, what do you say? Wanting Jesus to take a stand for the law. But what did Jesus do? It says that Jesus stooped down with his finger and wrote on the ground. Notice, it says, John makes sure that we say that Jesus stooped down. And what Jesus did is she's there cowering at the center of the court. We saw this. She's there cowering, huddled up, probably her face to the ground. And he stooped down right beside her, all the surrounding him, all the Pharisees with rocks in their hands. And he stooped down right over top of her. Why? Not to expose her, but to protect her. That's grace.